The night my parents came to take my house. My father did not ring the bell. He entered the old keypad code instead. 3 numbers, a pause, then the fourth. The same code I had given my family 2 Thanksgivings earlier, when I still believed access granted once would be treated as a privilege, not inherited as a right. The lock flashed red. My security camera sent the alert at 7:53 on a cold Friday evening. Autumn rain struck the windows of my home office hard enough to blur the streetlights. When I opened the live feed, a white U-Haul sat across half my driveway, angled so tightly that my car could not leave the garage. My father, Richard, stood beneath the porch light. My mother, Elaine, hurried behind him with a thick folder hidden under her raincoat. My younger brother, Logan, remained in the passenger seat, his face lit by his phone. Dad tried the code again, read, a third time, read, then he struck the door with the side of his fist. "Tessa, open up! It's raining!" I pressed the intercom button. "You were told not to bring your belongings here." Mom stepped into view. Water ran from her hair onto the shoulders of her coat. "We only need a few weeks." Behind her, Dad had already unloaded 2 suitcases, 4 taped boxes, a folding chair, and the framed family photograph that had hung above their fireplace for 20 years. No one brought a folding chair and a family portrait to discuss a temporary stay. "Move the truck," I said. "Then leave." Dad held up the folder. "We have an agreement. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. Slide it through the mail slot." For several seconds, he stared into the camera as though I had embarrassed him. Then he bent down and pushed the papers beneath the door. The first page read, "Family Occupancy Agreement." My parents would pay $100 per month. They would receive exclusive use of 2 upstairs bedrooms and permission to receive mail at my address. I would be required to provide written notice before ending the arrangement. Any money they spent on repairs, appliances, or improvements would be recorded as property contributions. Their signatures were already at the bottom. Mine was the only blank line. The document gave them no rights without my consent, but I understood what it was designed to create. If I let them inside, accepted even one payment, allowed their mail to arrive, or let them begin improving the house, they could later claim there had been an oral agreement. They had not come to ask permission. They had come to manufacture evidence that permission had already been given. I called through the door. "Who prepared this?" Dad answered, "Open the door and we'll talk like a family." I secured the safety chain before opening it 3 inches. Cold rain blew through the gap. Dad immediately placed his hand against the edge of the door. "Don't turn this into a performance," he said. "Remove your hand. You have 3 bedrooms. Tessa." "Remove your hand," Mom whispered my name, the way she always did when she wanted me to confuse her fear with my responsibility. Dad pushed once, testing the chain. I did not push him back. I did not shout. I reached for my phone. "I'm calling 911. His expression changed. "You would call the police on your own father?" "I am calling because someone is preventing me from closing my door after being told to leave." I gave the dispatcher my address and described the blocked driveway, the attempted entry, and the 3 people refusing to leave my property. That was when Logan finally got out of the truck. He wore an expensive charcoal jacket and held a phone newer than mine. Rain darkened his hair as he walked toward the porch, irritation replacing the careful boredom he had displayed from the passenger seat. "Can everyone stop acting insane?" he said. I looked at him through the narrow opening. "Tell them to leave. If you delay this until Monday, everything collapses." Dad turned sharply toward him. Mom gripped the folder beneath her coat so tightly that the cardboard bent. "What happens Monday?" I asked. No one answered. For the first time, all three of them looked uncertain. Not ashamed, not frightened for me, uncertain. As if the locked door had interrupted a plan whose success depended on my obedience. I realized then that the rain, the luggage, and my mother's trembling voice were not accidents. They were under pressure. A siren sounded somewhere beyond the neighborhood entrance. Dad withdrew his hand from the door. I closed it, locked the deadbolt, and picked up the remaining pages from the floor. Near the back was a printed appointment confirmation. Closing, Monday, 10:00 joined. Below it, beside my name, were the words, property owner and proposed guarantor. 3 days before the U-Haul appeared in my driveway, my mother called while I was reviewing a compliance report in my home office. She did not ask whether I had eaten, whether work was busy, or whether I was sleeping any better after the last audit cycle. She said, "Your father and I may need to stay with you for a while." My hand stopped above the keyboard. "Is Logan involved?" "Don't turn everything into a story about your brother." That denial was the answer. Logan had always been the reason adults lowered their voices and moved money without explaining where it went. When I was 12, I spent one summer babysitting 2 children down the street. I kept the bills in a blue envelope inside my dresser because I wanted a used camera. Then Logan broke a neighbor's window with a baseball. Dad took the envelope and said the family had to solve problems together. When I was 17, I gave up a school trip to Washington, D.C. The deposit had already been paid, but Logan suddenly needed an expensive test preparation course. Mom called it an investment in his future. My trip became something selfish I should be mature enough to surrender. The year I received a college scholarship. Dad told me not to talk about it too much at dinner because Logan had just been suspended. He said my good news might make him feel worse. Later, when I started my first full-time job, Dad asked me to cover Logan's rent just once. It was never once. There was the car loan Logan stopped paying because the interest rate was predatory. There was the pop-up restaurant that closed after 3 months. There were unpaid taxes, a dispute with a former partner, and emergency after emergency presented as the final obstacle before his life finally began. The largest amount I gave was $14,000 to prevent his eviction. Mom cried on the phone. Dad said Logan would lose everything. Logan promised he had changed. 2 weeks later, I saw photographs of him in Aspen with his girlfriend. He claimed the trip had been booked before the crisis, and that canceling would have wasted money. That was the last time I transferred anything. For years, I thought my problem was that I had been too trusting. The truth was more complicated. I had not been taught that my money belonged to Logan. I had been taught that keeping something he needed made me selfish. I looked around the house as Mom waited for my answer. I had bought it 4 years earlier, after years of student loan payments, weekend consulting work, and vacations postponed until next summer. On my first night there, I ate Chinese takeout on the kitchen floor because I owned one folding table and no chairs. The living room had no sofa for 6 months. I painted the office myself, badly at first, then again after learning how to keep the roller marks even. When I received my first performance bonus, I paid extra toward the principal instead of replacing my 10-year-old car. The third bedroom remained mostly empty because I had not decided what I wanted it to become. Sometimes I imagined shelves of books, sometimes a recording room, sometimes nothing at all. The day I received the keys, Dad walked through every room without saying he was proud of me. He stood in the upstairs hallway, looked at the 3 bedrooms, and said, At least now the family will always have somewhere to come back to. At the time, I heard love in that sentence. Now I heard a claim. You have 3 bedrooms, Mom said on the phone. One person cannot possibly use all that space. I don't have to use every part of something for it to belong to me. After a pause, she said, Your father and I have done a great deal for you. I thought about the $3,000 they had given me after graduation. I had repaid it within 6 months because Dad had called every payday to ask when I would be able to start. Why do you need to move? I asked. We're restructuring. Where is your house? We'll explain in person. Where is Logan living? That is not relevant. How long is a while? Tessa, stop interrogating me. Her answers were not answers. She would not tell me why they had to leave, where they had been staying, what Logan had done, or when they expected to move out. Before hanging up, she said, Don't decide anything before you know the whole truth. Then tell me the truth. She said nothing. That evening, I opened the county property records website. My parents' house had been sold 11 days earlier. The duplex they had owned for years was no longer in their names either. No one in my family had told me they had sold anything. That night, after finding the property records, I opened a spreadsheet and began writing down facts. My parents' house had sold for less than similar homes in the neighborhood. The county records showed a second mortgage, recorded 18 months earlier, followed by a lien from a private lender. Their duplex had transferred 4 months before the house. I could not tell from public records where every dollar had gone. Only that much of the sale proceeds may have been consumed by debt. I refused to invent answers where the documents gave me none. Instead, I listed dates, amounts, lenders, and filing numbers. Then I checked my credit reports. There were 3 hard inquiries within the previous 2 months. One came from a commercial bank. Another came from an equipment financing company. The third came from a private lender based in Chicago. No new account had been opened. That did not make the inquiries harmless. I had never applied to any of those companies, never authorized anyone to check my credit, and never agreed to guarantee Logan's business. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I placed a fraud alert, changed the passwords to my email and bank accounts, and enabled 2-factor authentication wherever it was available. I wrote down the date, time, and name of every lender before calling each fraud department. None of them gave me an IP address or a copy of the full application. They would not discuss internal records with me until my identity was verified and the matter had been assigned. One representative confirmed only this: an application existed using my name, date of birth, and social security number. I ended the call and sat still for several seconds. Then I searched my old email. 7 months earlier, Mom had asked me for a copy of my driver's license, 1 page from a bank statement, and the address of my employer. She said Dad was updating their estate planning file and wanted the children's information stored correctly. I had sent everything, not because I was careless, because the person asking was my mother, and nothing in the request sounded unusual at the time. The shame arrived before the anger. I worked in compliance. I was paid to notice inconsistencies, missing controls, and risks hidden behind ordinary paperwork. For a moment, I wondered how I had failed to recognize one inside my own family. Then I stopped. Trust was not stupidity. Abusing trust was the wrongdoing. I called Naomi Chen, an attorney I had met during a difficult insurance audit 2 years earlier. She specialized in consumer disputes and financial fraud. I explained what I knew, separating what the records proved from what I only suspected. Naomi listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not argue with your family by phone. Do not threaten Logan. Do not accuse a lender of participating in fraud without evidence. Preserve every message. Save every voicemail. File an official identity theft report, and let the records lead us." She was not offering to rescue me. She was giving me a sequence. Then she asked, "Does anyone in your family have a key or access code to your house?" I remembered the keypad number I had shared during Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. "They know an old code. Change it tonight." I did. I also installed another camera facing the driveway and checked that the side entrance locked properly. The following morning, Dad sent a text. "Your mother and I will arrive Friday evening. We will discuss arrangements when we get there." I replied, "There are no arrangements. Do not bring belongings to my house." His answer came immediately. "You will not leave your parents homeless." I typed back, "You sold your house 11 days ago. Where are you staying?" For almost 2 hours, neither parent responded. Then Mom sent one word, "Hotel." No explanation followed. The word answered only the smallest question. It did not explain why they had sold 2 properties, why Logan remained unmentioned, or why my credit had been searched by companies I had never contacted or authorized in any form. By Friday afternoon, I had filed the reports Naomi recommended and sent her copies of the inquiries, the property filings, and my parents' messages. I was still working when my phone displayed a voicemail notification from the Chicago Lenders Fraud Department. The caller spoke carefully. She said she could not provide details directly, but my attorney should contact their compliance office as soon as possible. A closing file was scheduled for Monday. My name appeared in it as the proposed guarantor, the owner of the property expected to secure the loan, and a person who had supposedly agreed, in principle, to participate. I forwarded the voicemail to Naomi. She called me back after reviewing the lender's summary. Her voice was calm, which made the words feel heavier. "Tessa, your parents are not coming to ask for a bedroom." I looked toward the empty room across the hall. Naomi continued, "The lender is waiting for the homeowner's signature." The police dispatcher was still asking questions when I returned to the papers on the floor. Behind the family occupancy agreement were documents my parents had not mentioned through the camera. There was a closing appointment, a preliminary loan estimate, and a page describing my house as anticipated collateral. The proposed bridge loan was for $375,000. My name appeared in several places. Property owner, proposed guarantor, required signer. Every signature line assigned to Richard. Elaine, or Logan had been completed. Mine was blank. A notation beside the collateral description said the security instrument had to be executed by the property owner at closing. That line mattered. My house had not yet been pledged, and it could not be pledged unless I signed. They had brought the paperwork to close the distance between their assumption and my consent. My blank signature line was the only obstacle left. Outside, Dad kept talking as if repetition could turn his story into truth. "We need somewhere to stay," he said. "That is all this is." I lifted the closing page toward the narrow window beside the door. "You do not need bedrooms. You need my signature." Mom began crying. Logan stepped closer to the porch. "Those are preparation documents. Nothing is final." Why is my name in a file I have never seen? The lender needed to know what the structure might look like. What structure? A temporary bridge. Once Northline closes the acquisition, the loan gets repaid. No money has been approved, he added quickly. Nothing has been funded. You would receive equity in the company. How much equity? We have not finalized the percentage. What voting rights? That depends on the final capitalization. Which company is buying Northline? It is confidential. Is there a binding purchase agreement? Logan looked past me toward Dad. You are using technical questions to make this sound worse than it is. Technical questions are how people learn whether an investment exists. Dad moved back toward the door. No money has been released, he said. No one has been harmed. The words landed harder than an admission. You knew my information was being used? I knew you could help. That was not my question. We were trying to preserve something that could benefit everyone. You told a lender I had agreed. I told them you would understand once we explained the situation, which meant he had known I had not agreed. Blue lights reflected across the wet pavement before I could answer. 2 officers pulled in behind the U-Haul. One approached the porch, while the other asked Logan to move away from the door. I kept the chain secured and explained through the opening that I had told my parents in writing not to come, that my father had entered an old access code, blocked me from closing the door, and refused to leave. I showed the officer the unsigned agreement and the message on my phone. No one has permission to live here, I said. I have not signed any of this. Dad tried to explain the loan documents. The officer stopped him. We are not determining financial fraud on this porch, she said. That is a separate matter. She asked whether I wanted them removed from the property. Yes. The officers told my parents and Logan to load their belongings, clear the driveway, and leave. They recorded the names of everyone present, noted the attempted entry, and gave me an incident number. One officer said that if any of them returned without permission, I should call again immediately. Dad stared at me as if the incident report were more offensive than his hand against my door. Mom stepped toward the chain. Please, Tessa, 3 nights. That is all. Where does Logan live? Logan answered before she could. My condo is tied to the company. It was a long-term rental paid through Northline, not a home he owned. I had seen the building online. Underground parking, a fitness center, and a rooftop lounge. Then they can stay there. It is not suitable, he said. I looked at his tailored jacket, then at the luxury SUV parked behind the U-Haul. Logan's inconvenience does not create a right to my house. The second officer told them it was time to go. Dad carried the boxes back toward the truck. Mom followed with the framed photograph pressed against her chest. Logan waited until they were several steps from the porch, then spoke low enough that he probably believed the rain would hide it. I told you not to come before she signed. Dad answered, if we asked over the phone, she would say no. The porch camera captured both voices. That was when I understood the U-Haul was not desperation. It was strategy. The rain, the luggage, and my mother's tears were meant to make refusal feel cruel. They had planned to arrive as a completed emergency and turn my compassion into a signature. Before climbing into the truck, Mom looked back. You do not understand how much we have lost. How much? She looked at Dad. Logan answered for them, $640,000. The next morning, Naomi told me not to meet my parents in person. If they want to explain the money, she said, have them send documents, explanations change, numbers leave a trail. An hour later, Mom emailed a spreadsheet. The total at the bottom was $640,000. Over 5 years, my parents had withdrawn $205,000 from retirement accounts. They had received $118,000 in net proceeds from selling the duplex. They had borrowed another $142,000 against their house, then used $84,000 of the remaining sale proceeds after the mortgage, lien, and closing costs were paid. The rest came from savings, interest charges, consulting fees, and legal expenses. They had approximately $27,000 left in cash. The spreadsheet showed where much of it had gone. There were payments for Logan's overdue taxes and penalties, a settlement with a former business partner, rent for a demonstration site, production costs for investor videos, app design invoices, car loan payments, consulting retainers, and attorney fees. Several entries were simply labeled operating gap. Those gaps covered a business that had never secured a long-term customer. Logan had not persuaded my parents with tears alone. He had given them something more powerful, a professional story. His investor deck was polished. It showed sleek automated package centers inside apartment towers and shopping districts. A promotional video followed tenants collecting deliveries from illuminated lockers while calm music played underneath. There were photographs of Logan wearing conference badges beside executives whose names my father recognized. I had emails from people described as investors and a letter of interest from Meridian Urban Logistics. His financial projections suggested Northline could be acquired for millions once enough locations were operating, Dad liked to say. Logan thinks big. Every failure received a new name. The company was never losing money, it was pre-revenue. A canceled installation was a deployment delay. A customer who withdrew had revised its budget. An unpaid bill was a temporary financing gap. Words did not solve the problems. They only made each problem sound like evidence that success was close. I searched only public information and the documents already attached to the loan file. I checked Northline's website, its LinkedIn page, Ohio Business Registrations, the address used for the demonstration center, and the investor deck submitted to the lender. The company presented itself as a growing operation with sales, engineering, installation, and creative teams. Publicly visible records told a smaller story. Northline appeared to have 2 full-time employees, Logan and his girlfriend, Marissa, whose title was creative director. Everyone else listed in the deck was described elsewhere as a contractor, consultant, or freelance specialist. That did not mean the company was imaginary. It meant the scale being sold to lenders and my parents was not the scale that existed. I called the property manager for the demonstration address and explained that I was verifying a proposed transaction in which my name had been used. She would not share private financial records, but she confirmed 4 facts. Northline did not own the location. It had rented part of the space for a short demonstration period. There was no long-term lease. Payments had fallen behind. Later that afternoon, Naomi called with another development. A contractor named Owen Blake had contacted her after hearing that Monday's closing had been suspended. His company had installed the locker units shown in Northline's promotional video. Logan still owed him $7,800. Owen told Naomi. He filmed there for 3 days, then we removed half the equipment because he never paid the remaining invoice. The revelation was worse than discovering that everything had been fake. Northline had been real enough to hire people, rent space, and create obligations. It was real enough to leave unpaid workers behind. But its visible success had been staged, cropped, and edited until a temporary demonstration looked like an operating network. Every time my parents rescued Logan, they had not merely protected him from consequences, they had allowed him to keep making promises to new people. I remembered a dinner 2 years earlier. Logan had spent 20 minutes describing a project that had not launched. Dad leaned back with pride and said his son had vision. When I mentioned that I had signed the largest client of my career, Dad nodded once and asked how much I could contribute to Logan's next phase. The memory no longer felt small. Logan was loved for what he promised he would build. I was noticed when something I had already built could be used to save him. Near sunset, Naomi called again. She had reviewed the letter from Meridian Urban Logistics. "It is not a purchase agreement," she said. "It is a non-binding expression of interest." The document did not identify committed capital, a purchase price, a closing date, or any obligation requiring Meridian to complete the transaction under any conditions stated in the letter. Meridian had been formed only 2 months earlier. Its registered address was a virtual mailbox. Its only listed manager was one of Logan's college friends. By Sunday morning, my family had replaced the story with one that required no signatures, no credit inquiries, and no locked door. Denise, my father's older sister, posted first in the family group chat. Richard and Elaine had sacrificed everything to help their son through a business crisis. I had agreed to let them stay temporarily, then changed my mind after they drove to my house. According to Denise, I had chosen an empty bedroom over my own parents'. No one mentioned the Chicago lender. No one mentioned Monday's closing, the anticipated collateral, the unsigned guarantor line, or Dad entering an old access code after I had told them not to come. Uncle responded with praying hands. He did not offer money, a room, or transportation. Others stayed silent. My cousin Aaron sent me a private message. "They said you invited them. Is that true?" I sent him 2 photographs. Dad's text announcing they were coming, followed by my reply telling them not to bring belongings, and the final page of the occupancy agreement with my signature line empty. Aaron did not answer me directly. Instead, he returned to the group chat and wrote, "If Tessa agreed, why is her signature blank?" The conversation stopped for several minutes. Aunt Denise wrote that paperwork should never matter more than family. Aaron replied that consent was not paperwork. Another cousin asked whether Mom and Dad had anywhere to sleep. Nobody answered when Aaron asked who was willing to host them. The silence changed shape. It was no longer sympathy. It was the moment everyone realized their compassion had limits once the cost reached their front door. Naomi advised me not to publish the complete loan file. There were personal identifiers, lender communications, and facts still being reviewed. I did not need to prove every part of the case to every relative. I needed to prevent a false version from damaging my name. I posted one statement. "I did not invite anyone to move into my home. I did not consent to my property being used as collateral. Unauthorized credit activity involving my information is being handled through appropriate channels. I will not discuss the matter further." I attached a still image of the U-Haul across my driveway, a redacted photograph of the blank signature line, and part of the police incident number. I did not post the footage of Dad's hand in my door. I did not post Mom crying. The purpose was not humiliation. It was correction. Denise replied that a woman with 3 bedrooms should not leave her parents in a hotel. That afternoon, Dad asked whether he and Mom could stay in Denise's basement. She offered 2 weeks. They would have to sign a guest agreement, use only the basement entrance, receive no mail at her address, keep Logan away from the property, and leave on a date specified in writing. Dad called the conditions insulting. I said nothing. On Monday morning, 2 of my consulting clients forwarded the same anonymous email. It claimed I was under investigation for financial misconduct, that I had exploited my elderly parents, and that my family dispute created a serious ethical conflict. It advised the companies to suspend my work until the matter was resolved. The accusation was not merely cruel. My business depended on clients trusting my judgment, discretion, and honesty. For several minutes, I felt the old impulse to explain everything at once. Instead, I followed procedure. I told each client that the message appeared connected to an active case involving unauthorized use of my identity. I provided Naomi's contact information and said I would answer questions through appropriate channels. I did not send family screenshots, loan documents, or emotional explanations. I did not call Logan. I forwarded the emails and their attachments to Naomi. The metadata was not proof by itself. Files could be copied, renamed, or edited. But one attachment listed an author name associated with Logan, contained an internal path labeled Northline, and included a sharing link connected to a company cloud account. Naomi called it a lead, not a conclusion. She sent preservation demands to Logan, Northline, the email provider, and the cloud storage company. She explained that the letters did not force anyone to release data. They placed the recipients on notice that relevant messages, account records, and access logs must not be destroyed while legal claims and an investigation were reasonably anticipated. By noon, the Chicago lender formally canceled Monday's closing. The email said the transaction would not proceed because the listed property owner had denied consent and disputed the application. For the first time since the U-Haul arrived, I allowed myself to breathe. 1 hour later, my doorbell camera sent another alert. Dad stood alone beneath the porch light. He carried no suitcase. He held a sealed envelope. "There is another agreement," he said into the camera. "Your mother does not know about it." Dad did not ask to come inside. He stood beneath the porch light while rainwater dripped from the edge of his coat. I spoke through the camera and told him to place the envelope on the mat, step back, and keep his hands visible. He obeyed. The porch camera recorded every word, but I also started an audio memo, not to trap him, only to preserve what he chose to admit that afternoon. "The closing is gone," he said. "Logan cannot pay the contractors. Northline may collapse. If the lender sends the file to investigators, this could become criminal. What do you want? 48 hours. Delay your cooperation. Let me speak to him first." I opened the door only after Dad had moved to the sidewalk. The envelope contained a side agreement between him and Logan. Dad had guaranteed another $85,000. Promised to transfer the remaining $27,000 my parents still had, and agreed to provide information about my income and property. In return, Logan promised repayment after Meridian Urban Logistics acquired Northline. My parents had not merely lost $640,000. Their total exposure could reach $725,000. I photographed every page and sent the images to Naomi. She called while Dad remained outside. Meridian has no identifiable employees, no transaction history, and no operating location, she said. Its manager is Logan's college friend. The letter creates no obligation to buy Northline, and I cannot find evidence that Meridian controls enough capital to make the purchase. I repeated her findings through the camera. Dad lowered his eyes. "When did you begin doubting the buyer?" I asked. He hesitated long enough to answer without words. 3 weeks ago, he finally said. "I noticed the mailbox address. Logan said the company had been structured that way to protect confidentiality." "And you believed him?" "Not completely." The answer felt colder than a lie. Dad admitted he had questioned whether Meridian was ready to buy anything, but he believed the bridge loan would give Logan another 6 months. More locations could be built. A real investor might appear. The false promise might become true before anyone suffered a permanent loss. "You did not trust the deal," I said. "You trusted my house to buy him more time." Dad stepped closer. then stopped when I reminded him to stay off the porch. My phone vibrated. Naomi had forwarded a screenshot Elaine had sent her minutes earlier. It showed a message from Dad to Logan before the U-Haul arrived. "Do not ask your sister by phone. She will say no. When your mother is standing outside with luggage, Tessa will not throw us out." I read the message twice. The truck had not been an act of panic. The rain had not forced their timing. Mom's trembling voice had not changed the plan. The plan had depended on my guilt. They knew I had not agreed. They simply believed my refusal would weaken once it had witnesses. "Mom found your message," I said. Dad's face tightened. "Your mother does not understand the pressure we were under. She understood enough to stand outside my house after I said no." He told me I was reducing a family crisis to paperwork. He said I had a stable career, excellent credit, and enough discipline to recover even if Northline failed. I could rebuild savings. I could refinance later. I had always landed on my feet. "Logan cannot survive another complete collapse," he said. "You can." That sentence explained my childhood more clearly than any apology could have. I had not been asked to sacrifice because I mattered less in some simple way. I had been charged more because everyone believed I could survive the charge. My competence had become permission. My stability had become a resource. Every time I recovered, they used the recovery as proof that taking from me had not been cruel, Dad said. "You always recover," I answered. "Because no one ever allowed me to be the person who needed rescuing." He asked again for 48 hours. "No." "You are choosing the law over your family." "No." "You chose Logan's 16th rescue over the daughter who was never allowed to need one." He said I had no compassion. Compassion was paying for 3 nights in a hotel. Enabling would be putting my house beneath Logan's debt. Dad looked toward the driveway where the U-Haul had stood. "If this destroys him, that will be on you." "No, what he submitted belongs to him. What you supplied belongs to you. My refusal belongs to me." I told him there would be no delay. After he left, Mom called. Her voice was quiet, without tears. "I found emails," she said. "Your father knew weeks ago that Meridian had no money. He told Logan they only needed the appearance of a buyer until the loan closed." I said nothing. For the first time, Mom did not ask me to protect Logan or soften the truth. She asked, "Who do I send them to?" The first 3 weeks after the closing was canceled were quieter than the night of the U-Haul, but more destructive. Northline never received the $375,000. Without the bridge loan, Logan could not pay several contractors. 2 pilot agreements were canceled after clients learned the financing had collapsed. The owner of the demonstration site terminated Northline's arrangement, and Owen Blake filed a formal claim for the $7,800 he was owed. Logan also stopped making payments on the luxury vehicle. His bank opened a review after receiving notice that disputed identity information had been used in a loan package. The bank did not freeze accounts overnight. Some transactions were restricted while records were examined, and transfers required additional approval. That was enough. Vendors stopped extending credit. Potential investors stopped returning calls. The company had not been destroyed by one decision from me. It had been held together by money that never should have arrived. Over the months, the records became clearer. An email address differing from mine by 1 letter had been used to confirm that I supported the transaction. Northline's revenue had been exaggerated. Several investor commitments were non-binding or non-existent. An appraisal of my house had been ordered without my knowledge. Dad had supplied information about my income, employer, and property. Logan had assembled and submitted the package. Mom had forwarded my license and bank statement and joined the attempt to pressure me at the house. But investigators found no evidence that she understood the false email, inflated revenue, or shell buyer. The distinctions mattered. Logan had designed the fraud. Dad had known enough to help it continue. Mom had participated in the coercion and document sharing, even if she had not understood the structure. By the 6th month, Northline had dissolved. Logan's vehicle was repossessed after several missed payments. The condo paid through the company was lost when the lease went unpaid. He accepted a supervised legal resolution. He was required to make restitution according to his ability, submit to financial monitoring, and avoid managing investor funds or signing financial documents for a defined period. He found salaried work with a logistics company. There was no sudden transformation. He still told relatives, "If Tessa had given me more time, things would have been different." For the first time, no one paid his bills to help him prove it. Dad sold his truck, spent months in an extended stay motel, and later moved into a small apartment. He no longer controlled family gatherings because few gatherings remained. He continued writing letters to me. In one, he said he was prepared to forgive me if I reduced my cooperation with investigators and helped Logan reach a private settlement. I placed the letter in my legal file. Dad had done one responsible thing by giving me the side agreement. That did not erase the fact that he had asked me to delay the truth. He still believed the family had been harmed by my refusal, rather than by the choices that made my refusal necessary. He was not permitted at my house. Mom rented a furnished room from a school employee and found part-time administrative work. She sent the emails to Naomi and the investigator without warning Dad. She did not ask me to change my statement or protect Logan. A month after I paid for 3 hotel nights, she transferred $50 to me. The note read, "Hotel repayment, 1 of 12. I did not return it. I did not call it forgiveness either. I saved the receipt. The extended family changed less dramatically than people do in satisfying endings. Denise never apologized. She sent one message saying, "Perhaps we did not know the story." Aaron admitted he had believed my parents too quickly. The relatives who once insisted I should open my home never offered their homes, savings, or credit to save Logan. I did not leave the year untouched. One client ended our contract because they wanted no connection to a family dispute involving fraud allegations. 2 others continued working with me after Naomi provided a factual summary. I slept badly. I checked the cameras too often. A delivery truck stopping outside could make my heart race before I recognized the logo. The worst feeling was shame. I reviewed risk for a living, yet I had failed to see danger inside people I loved. Sophie corrected me one evening while sitting on my kitchen floor beside unopened takeout. "Trusting someone you love is not a professional failure," she said. I began therapy, slowly. I learned to ask Sophie to stay when I was frightened, to let Naomi manage legal communication, and to accept help without treating it as a debt I would someday repay. 11 months after the U-Haul, Mom called. She did not ask for money or mention Logan. She asked whether, someday, she might be allowed to see what the empty bedroom had become. I did not answer immediately. 1 year later, I still lived in the same house. I did not sell it to escape the memory of the U-Haul, the rain, or my father's hand against the door. Leaving would have made the house feel like evidence. Staying allowed it to become mine again. The empty bedroom became a library and recording space. I installed shelves, a small desk, sound panels, and one comfortable chair for friends. There was no guest bed waiting for someone who might arrive without permission. I did not decorate the room like a victory. It was simply useful. I still checked my credit more often than necessary. I noticed delivery trucks before I noticed birds. I disliked anyone standing too long near the porch. But other things changed. I asked Sophie to help carry books upstairs, instead of moving every box alone. I let Naomi handle documents without rereading every message 5 times. I took afternoons off without convincing myself rest had to be earned. I stopped believing that accepting help meant surrendering authority. Independence was not the absence of need. It was the right to choose who entered, what I gave, and which doors opened. Mom and I met at a coffee shop several weeks after her question about the room. She did not ask for money. She did not mention Logan. She did not ask me to forgive her. "Could I see the library someday?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, "but not because you are my mother. Only when what you do makes me feel safe." She nodded. It was not reconciliation. It was a possibility being built through repeated choices. Dad still was not allowed inside my house. He continued to believe I had pushed everything too far. His letters became less frequent, but they never became honest enough to answer. Logan sent one email after making his first restitution payment. "I paid the first installment. I do not expect you to reply." I did not reply. I saved the message in the legal file. His responsibility no longer depended on my forgiveness, and my healing no longer depended on his apology. While organizing my office, I found the family occupancy agreement. My parents' signatures remained at the bottom. My line was still blank. I framed only that section. The carpenter installing the final shelf asked whether I wanted to hang it in the library. "No," I said. "I do not want this house to become a museum of what they did." I placed the frame inside my office closet, not to forget, to keep the memory from becoming the center of my life. Only I knew the new door code. Sophie always texted before visiting. Even after I told her she could let herself in, she still waited on the porch until I answered. That small habit taught me something my family never had. People who respect you do not treat access once given as permission forever. My father once said our family broke because I chose the law over love. He was wrong. It had been cracking for years. Each time we took the future of the responsible child to buy more time for the one who refused responsibility. I did not destroy my family. I only stopped letting them use me as material to keep it standing. If this story reached something familiar in you, tell me where compassion ends and enabling begins. Would you have allowed Elaine to visit after a year of changed behavior, or would the door remain closed? Share your answer below. If you value stories about family, boundaries, accountability, and healing without easy forgiveness, subscribe to the channel. The next story may remind someone that saying no can also be love.